Hi, Jeff. Thanks for coming on today. Appreciate you're all busy. It's February, a wonderful Thursday where I am in Thailand. I'm hoping it's all good where you are. Look, guys, I just want to do a quickly catch up on the major issue in each of your sub-regions. I'll go and kick off first up, and that's, of course, today in Indonesia, Southeast Asia, and it's the old, wonderful thing that we all think about when we think of Indonesia, and I'm not talking Bali, I'm talking corruption. There have been anti-corruption protests again in Jakarta. Multiple activist groups protested at the Corruption Eradication Commission in Jakarta. The Islamic Student Association protested a demand that the KPK, which is the Anti-Corruption Commission, investigate suspected corruption involving the Sidoarjo Regency, or Kabupaten, as they call it in Indonesia, government figures. It's a regency in East Java. Another group called the Aliansi Rakyat Menggugat also protested at the KPK building. That group protested against the government over its measures to manage COVID-19. The ARM has protested over the same issue before. That's the Aliansi Rakyat Menggugat. The protests caused some heavy traffic. But I want to talk about potential impacts of corruption in Indonesia. Firstly, if you need licenses from the government, and that's pretty much every business, and if you need partners from the government, then multiply what I'm about to say by an infinitum number of your choice, then you are dealing with corruption. Whether you think you've hidden it or not, shareholders and managing teams abroad need to understand living in a bubble and pretending you've got it covered used to cut it. Now the systems to mitigate that are way too technical. So we need to consider how you go about making sure you're resilient against corruption. And of course, often your management teams in Indonesia, your accounting companies, by your briefings, consciously or subconsciously, they're going to hide it and take care of it for you. And if that's your approach, it's a ticking time bomb. Hope it goes to the next manager after you. And it's openly discussed in Jakarta. Management teams, both Indonesians and Westerners, they talk about how they're making their sales figures so easily because they've got special relationships. Now, us and other companies go in and audit those companies and find very different findings from the big four accounting firms. So don't be the naive dude in your backyard living in America, happily bouncing along, or in the UK or in Australia thinking how good the Indonesian business unit's doing. Because if you are helping and abating in not having a level playing field, and you're at a shareholder and you're at a director level, you can end up in jail. So don't be too smart and outsmart yourself. Think about what I've said before it's too late. Okay, any questions before I hand over to Uday in South Asia?
Yeah, Paul, just one quick question. So in 2024 is the next presidential elections. Do you see these dynamics changing at all?
You mean because of the presidential election,
Yes,
will corruption change in Indonesia?
if a new president comes to power.
The short answer is yes, but it's more likely to go up than down. The reason I say that isn't an individual basis of who's the president. It's more about they decentralized power in Indonesia to push power out to the governors and the kabupatens to decrease chances of provinces and various tribal groups splitting off the country. Certain powers to be in Indonesia now are trying to focus on bringing that power back into Jakarta. So business is easier to do is how they present it. But what that means is so we can get a bigger chunk without having another tier of government thinking about things like tribal rights or their own development in faraway provinces that don't affect the big fat bellies in Jakarta that want to build a 27th palace now for their families, I mean, not for their country. The key thing there, Uday, to note is that never going to eradicate corruption in Indonesia when government figures, security forces have such a small salary that they see it as a retainer and a commission. So the commission, though, is the corruption bit, and that isn't for grandiose palaces like those in central Jakarta, government figures and associated people. It's so they can feed their family, educate them, and get basic needs. Whereas corruption in Indonesia that is insidious is really probably better defined by who's using it to be greedy, to deprive other people, to deprive the nation of funds for the good of everybody, and just being narcissistic people to develop power and greed for themselves. So in short, more likely to go up with a change, and that's more about people trying to drag power back into Jakarta so they can abuse it. Uday, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does, Paul. I'll move on to South Asia today, where we covered one assessed event and 12 other developments. So I'd like to talk about protests across Pakistan.
Wonderful, Uday. I'll leave you to that.
Yeah.
I'm just going to make one other point. I should have mentioned we had one assessed event in East Asia Pacific today and 26 other developments. One notable issue in China is the Winter Olympics are about to start and they're pumping out snow out of snow machines because the snow's just not playing the game. Of course, globally, everyone's blaming that on global warming because it's nice and convenient. Maybe that, more likely it's just a shocking ski season. Thanks, chaps.
Right. So moving on to South Asia today, one assessed event, 12 other developments, and I'll be talking about the protests in Pakistan. So hundreds of people protested against gas shortages in industrial zones in Karachi. Meanwhile, if we go over to Balochistan, groups have threatened protests in which they're going to block major highways in the province, even around Gwadar, where China is building a port. There's also a protest march planned for Quetta. Now, Balochistan is a mineral-rich and mineral-rich province, but locals say that they have not benefited from the development there, especially the China-Pakistan economic corridor. This has caused Baloch separatist groups to emerge and attack Pakistani forces and Chinese interests. Now, if we move over to Punjab province, the Jamaat-e-Islami is to protest in Gujarat over economic and infrastructure issues, or the lack of infrastructure. They'll also hold a protest in Lahore in March. So we're seeing protests in multiple provinces across the country. Of course, businesses should be aware of the security risks such as violence and travel disruptions, but also disruptions to supply chains due to not only the protests, but the lack of gas, electricity, and other commodities. Summer is going to be coming up in Pakistan, and load shedding occurs frequently there because the temperatures get too hot for the generators. So I think that's it for South Asia for me, unless there's any questions. Okay, then we'll throw it over to Bassel, who will talk about the Middle East.
Thank you, Uday. So I'll be talking today about the EMEA region, especially Europe and the Middle East. In EMEA today, we had over 36 developments with two major events. Starting off with Europe, there was a major development, especially protests in the UK, in the United Kingdom, in Manchester. The protest was by taxi driver in Salford. The main point of the protest is to demand the elimination of the additional tax to use the highway as part of a plan by the state to do a great named under Greater Manchester Clean Air Zone to address the problems of climate change and pollution. Around 500 taxi drivers are expected to gather in Salford and rally within the state into Manchester City. Do you have any questions about this?
Actually, Bassel, so right now it's taxi drivers. Do you see it expanding to other sectors such as logistics, for example, or transports?
Actually, I see it expanding over to logistics, truck drivers. There may be some supply chain disruptions because the tax is upon all of these different categories, from taxi drivers to truck drivers to logistics convoys and everything. So and you know, as it differentiates in category, it increases in price and increases in tax. So I see it as disruptive. Going over to the Middle East, we have also a major development in Syria. A US-led coalition raided the Atmi town in Idlib governorate 12 people or 12 civilians were killed during the raid. The coalition was after an Al-Qaeda affiliated terrorist in the region. According to some witnesses, several gunshots and explosions were heard near the house of the affiliated Al-Qaeda terrorist. It's worth noting that northwestern Syria, especially Idlib governorate, is under the control of opposition forces against the Syrian regime.
Bassel, I have a question here.
Yeah.
So when we talk about Syria, especially this area, the normal group that we talk about is the Islamic State. Do you see a resurgence of Al-Qaeda over here?
Actually, Uday, there are a lot of different militias and different terrorist groups in Syria. Northwestern Syria, especially Idlib, is under the control of opposition forces, and they have some Al-Qaeda members with them, but I don't see an expansion or resurgence of Al-Qaeda, especially with the support of the US-led coalition and the Turkish forces in northern Syria. But what I see is a resurgence of the Islamic State that has been doing some operations in Iraq, especially in Baghdad, and especially in northern Iraq, in Kirkuk and Erbil. And this may expand to Syria again, and we might see a resurgence for the Islamic State.
All right. Thanks a lot for that, Bassel. Sitati, let's move on to you. Could you tell us what's happening in Africa?
Well, thank you, Uday. In the case of Africa, we covered 16 developments today, and 2 of those featured or were assessed as major developments. And these 2 were the attacks by the Cooperation for the Development of Congo militia, whereby 60 people were killed in the Ituri province of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And then the other assessed event was on the massive disruption caused by the cyclone Batsirrai in Mauritius yesterday. And just to note that heavy rainfall and strong winds are also expected today in various parts of South Africa due to the effects of cyclone Batsirai. And to also notice that the eastern region of the Eastern Cape province would or could potentially be most affected. And this could lead to major disruptions in air, road, and sea travel. But further from that, a few notable after-coup developments in Burkina Faso are set to impact business activities, supply chains, and transportation in various ways. And to note is that yesterday, the transitional government lifted the nationwide curfew and also fully reopened its land borders. This is expected to enhance road travel in the country, especially along the borders with some of the neighboring states or countries. Further from that is that the opening of the land borders comes after the transitional government reopened air borders on January 25th. However, some of the major airlines that operate flights in to and from the capital Ouagadougou, such as Tunis Air, Air France, the Turkish Airlines, and the Royal Air Maroc, are yet to announce the resumption of their flights to and from the capital. And then to add to this is that social gatherings based on yesterday's proclamation or announcement by the transitional government is that they'll still remain prohibited after 12 p.m. Local time from Monday to Thursday on a weekly basis, and also after 2 a.m. on Fridays to Sundays. And of course, this new restriction is expected to remain in effect until further notice. And so what we're likely to see is that the new restrictions on social gatherings are likely to affect businesses whose activities or operations mostly depend on such kind of gatherings. And the ban on the gatherings was imposed perhaps due to the fear of violent clashes or protests as the military continues to remain in power. And of course, based on this, I don't know if you have any questions from you.
Yes, Sitati, I have a question here regarding the latest coup in Burkina Faso. So we've witnessed some military coups in Africa, especially in Mali and Guinea. Do you see a difference between those two and the latest military coup in Burkina Faso?
Yes, thank you, Bassel, for that question. I mean, when you look at the three countries, what you notice, one of the differences certainly is on the main causes of the military coups. In the case of Mali and Burkina Faso, the coups majorly resulted from, the rising insecurity, especially caused by consistent terrorist attacks by armed groups or terror groups affiliated to the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda operating within the Sahel region. And then in the case of Guinea, the military coup was caused by the attempt by the former president, Alpha Conde, to extend his term in office. But then again, another difference that you come to notice between or considering the three countries is on the sanctions imposed by different entities. So in the case of Mali, the Economic Community of West African States, that's the regional bloc or body in the West African region, imposed extremely harsh kind of economic sanctions on the country itself. So the borders are yet to be reopened with most neighboring states or most countries that are member states of the Economic Community of West African States. But then again, comparatively with the case of Guinea and Burkina Faso, the two countries have only been suspended, the memberships have been suspended from the African Union and the Economic Community of West African States. But harsh sanctions are yet to be imposed on the two countries. But to note to this is that the Economic Community of West African States today will be having an extraordinary summit or meeting in Accra, Ghana. And we are yet to see, or we're expecting to see perhaps more sanctions being imposed either on Burkina Faso or either of these other countries which have experienced coups in that particular region. So that's what I can remark on regarding the major differences considering the three countries.
All right, thanks a lot for that, Sitati. I guess we're done for the day. We will see you all next week. Anyone who has any queries or questions can reach out to us. And yeah, have a good weekend, everyone.